Hi everyone, my name is Madden Carlson, and the topic for my lesson plan is the NGSS ESS 2.E concept of bioecology. The cross-cutting concept that I will use in this lesson is cause and effect, and my scientific practice will be analyzing and interpreting data. Bioecology is defined as the relationship among different living organisms and their environment. Bioecologists study how living things influence and affect the environment in which they live in, and obviously this can be both positive and negative effects. Although there isn't a chapter or section in our textbook that explicitly talks about bioecology, there are a few sections that talk about the influence that living things have on their environment. For example, on page 588, it talks about climate change and how humans are contributing towards it by emitting greenhouse gases and other pollutants. And also on pages 607 to 609, it discusses the importance of fresh water, in that in the United States, we use fresh water every day to drink, clean, cook, etc. And if for some reason our freshwater supply were suddenly to dwindle or just not be as accessible, living things would begin to die because, as we all know, living things need water in order to survive. And that's one example of cause and effect, is that if there is no water, there can be no life. The objective of my lesson is that by looking at a picture of an ecosystem, students will be able to accurately state the significance and role of the majority of organisms that live in this environment. I will start off my lesson by asking my students what they think an ecosystem is, and after hearing a few of their answers, I will then provide them with the actual definition, which is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. I would then show them a movie clip from Bee Movie, in where the bees have decided to take time off and want to relax and not pollinate the flowers, so they all begin to die and wilt. After I show this clip, I could ask my students, what did you notice happened in this video? Are bees important in nature? And how about other animals? I would discuss this with my class and let them know the cause and effect relationships that living organisms have on their environment. Because as seen in the clip, if bees aren't doing their job in pollinating the flowers, they will die. I'll then project a picture of the ecosystem in which wherever I'm teaching will be. So let's say for this sake, it's San Diego. And I'll explain the different organisms and plants that exist here and their important role that they play. Next, I would have my students do an activity where I will assign myself and all of them different animals and plants. And starting with me, I'll take a ball of yarn and say how my animal or plant relates or relies on another student's animal or plant in order to survive. I will then have each of my students do this until we are all holding a piece of string and are all connected in one way to another. So a way I explain this to my class would be, okay guys, we're now going to do an activity, so please quietly come to the front of the room and form a circle. I'm going to assign each of you and myself a plant or animal, and I'm going to pass this ball of yarn to one another and see how everything in an ecosystem is connected. I'll go first, and since I'm a coyote, I will rely on rabbits for my food. And Jimmy, since you're a rabbit, I'm gonna give this ball of yarn to you. Now Jimmy, I need you to pick one of your classmates that's a plant or animal that relates to you, and you can pass the string to them and it will just go until we're all holding a piece of string. The whole class will be holding a piece of yarn, and each student can see how an ecosystem is really connected and intertwined with one another. Then I will begin to switch gears and start giving scenarios in which, if it applies to myself or any of my students, they must let go of their string. So for example, if I say, let's say there was a fire that came through Redwood Circle here in San Diego and destroyed most of the brush and vegetation. Drop your string if this applies to you. So obviously most of the plant and vegetation cards that I gave to my students, they would have to drop their string, and as I give more and more scenarios, more and more students would drop their strings, and they can begin to see how the environment can change and how by one animal or plant having to leave in an ecosystem, the whole thing becomes less connected. So this is a great way to show cause and effect, as all plants and animals in an ecosystem rely on one another to survive, and if something were to happen to one species of plant or animal, it will likely have a domino effect and ripple to the others as well. After the activity, I'll ask my students what they learned, and by asking them questions such as, what did you guys learn about the relationships in an ecosystem, and does every living thing play a role? and hopefully if they're paying attention, their answer should be yes. I'd also be sure to touch on the human impacts of the environment as well, such as asking questions like, do humans contribute to the physical environment? And if so, would you say it's more good or bad? I'll then show my students some data of San Diego's environment and also some past data as well. For example, I'll show them this graph of the projected temperature changes over the next few years, and I will make sure to emphasize the fact that there is supposed to be a drastic increase in temperatures between the years of 2005 and 2070. So I could ask them some questions such as, how do you think this will impact the environment? Also, going beyond just data, I can share how San Diego's environment has changed over the years, such as in the past, bison used to roam around where Camp Pendleton currently is, and I can ask them questions such as, what do you think happened that caused them to go extinct here? This is then going to be my scientific practice of analyzing and interpreting data, as I'm presenting my students with different graphs and information about San Diego's past and present environmental states, and my students need to figure out what changed and how that's influenced what exists now today. For my assessment, I would then show my fifth graders different pictures of different ecosystems, like a marine ecosystem or a forest ecosystem, and ask them to silently write down the different organisms they think exist here and the role that they play. Additionally, I'd ask them to come up with a few scenarios in which would alter the peace, if you will, of the environment and change what animals live there or not. And I would then have them share with the class some of their answers. To wrap up my lesson, I'd ask if my students have any questions, and then just kind of summarize everything really quick, and then ask my signature question of, what is one thing you can impress your family with tonight that you learned from this lesson? For their homework, I'd like to have my students go out into their backyard or take a walk around their neighborhood and write down all of the living things that they see, including plants and animals, and then the role they believe it plays in their neighborhood or backyard. I'll then, in class the next day, have them partner up with a friend, and they can compare and contrast their findings, as well as talk about the different roles they said each thing played as well. And with that concludes my lesson on bioecology. I hope this was helpful and informative to you. Thank you so much for watching.